To support her daughter, Emily becomes a caregiver for a vegetative millionaire in a mansion full of secrets. But what seemed like an ordinary job reveals shocking conspiracies. When her daughter's life is threatened, Emily must choose between fleeing or fighting for the truth. Emily observed her reflection in the cracked mirror of the small bathroom. Deep, dark circles marked her young face, silent witnesses to the sleepless nights and constant worry that consumed her. At 28, she already carried on her shoulders the weight of responsibilities that seemed too great for one person alone. "Mom, I'm going to be late." The voice of Sophia, her 6-year-old daughter, echoed through the hallway of the tiny apartment they shared. "I'm coming, sweetheart," Emily replied, trying to inject a cheerfulness she didn't feel into her voice. Her hands trembled as she opened the latest overdue bill that had arrived in the mail. The eviction notice was clear. They had only 2 weeks to settle the debt or find another place to live. The layoff from the sewing factory 3 months ago had been just the beginning of a downward spiral that seemed endless. The temporary jobs she managed to find barely covered basic expenses, and Sophia's father remained missing, not contributing a single penny to their daughter's upbringing. Emily tucked the bill into the pocket of her worn-out jeans and went to prepare Sophia's breakfast. In the small kitchen, she improvised some oatmeal with the last flakes of oats left in the cupboard. Her daughter, a ray of sunshine in the storm that was her life, was already sitting at the table, swinging her little legs as she drew in a used notebook. "What are you drawing, Princess?" "Our new house, Mom. The one you promised we'd have one day. Look, it even has a garden." Sophia's smile was pure and hopeful, making Emily's heart ache. How could she explain to a child that her dreams might have to wait? That reality was much harsher than the colorful drawings she made. Emily's phone vibrated on the table. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Normally she would ignore it, assuming it was another bill collector, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Emily Thompson." A professional and polite female voice sounded on the other end of the line. "This is the New Horizons agency. We received your resume and have a job offer that might interest you." Emily didn't remember sending her resume to any agency recently, but she didn't mention it. Any opportunity at that moment deserved attention. "Yes, it's me. We have a position for a caregiver in a private residence. The starting salary is 12,000 rials, with the possibility of a raise after the probation period. It includes housing and all meals. Would you be interested?" Emily nearly dropped the phone. The amount mentioned was more than triple what she earned at the factory. It seemed too good to be true. Yes, of course, but I should mention that I don't have formal experience as a caregiver." "Don't worry about that. What we're looking for is someone reliable and discreet. Your previous experience with quality control at the factory indicates attention to detail, which is an important trait for us. Could you attend an interview this afternoon?" Emily looked at Sophie, who was still absorbed in her drawings. Mrs. Henderson, her neighbor who often looked after the girl when needed, certainly wouldn't mind watching her for a few hours. "Yes, I can. What's the address?" The woman provided the information and hung up, leaving Emily in a state of nervous excitement. It seemed like an opportunity fallen from the sky, but years of hardship had taught her to be wary of overly generous offers. After dropping Sophie off at school, Emily spent some time researching the New Horizons agency online. She found little: a simple website with few details and some vague references on job forums. Nothing that raised immediate red flags, but also nothing that fully reassured her. In the afternoon, wearing her only formal outfit, a black pantsuit bought on sale years ago, Emily arrived at the given address. It was a modest office building in the city center, neither too luxurious nor too plain. On the 10th floor, a secretary led her to a minimalist meeting room. The same woman from the call who introduced herself as Victoria Smith was already waiting. She was a lady of about 60, with perfectly styled grey hair and impeccable posture. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming. Let's get straight to the point. The job is at the Montgomery Mansion. Are you familiar with it?" Emily shook her head, though the last name sounded vaguely familiar. The Montgomery family is one of the most traditional in the city. The patriarch, Edward Montgomery, suffered an accident a few months ago and is now in a vegetative state. We need someone who can assist with his basic care, following the medical team's instructions. Victoria paused, studying Emily's reaction before continuing. The job requires full dedication. You would live in the mansion with Sundays off. We also offer extensive health insurance for dependents and a considerable semi-annual bonus. Is there anything preventing you from working under these conditions? Emily thought of Sophia. I have a 6-year-old daughter. Yes, we are aware. The mansion has more than enough space, and your daughter would be welcome to live there as, well, in fact, there is an excellent private school just a few blocks away. The offer kept getting better by the minute, and that only increased Emily's unease. It seems too perfect. Why me? There must be more qualified people. Victoria smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Thompson, sometimes the most qualified people aren't the most suitable. We're looking for someone who truly needs the job, who understands the value of discretion and loyalty. Your background shows that you are a responsible and dedicated person. That's exactly what we need. Emily signed the contract that same afternoon, after carefully reading each clause. There were several mentions of confidentiality and specific protocols to be followed, but nothing that seemed unreasonable considering she would be working in a high-end residence. The next day, after picking up Sophia from school, Emily packed their few belongings into 2 old suitcases. Mrs. Henderson cried as she said goodbye, making Emily promise to visit whenever possible. The taxi that took them to the Montgomery mansion drove for almost an hour, leaving the city centre behind and entering an area of estates and country houses. When they finally arrived, Emily had to hold back a gasp of astonishment. The mansion was an imposing early 20th century structure, with 3 floors and architecture that blended Victorian elements with colonial American touches. A marble staircase led to the main entrance, flanked by majestic columns. The garden, though well-maintained, had a melancholic air as if it held secrets among its flowers and trimmed bushes. "It looks like a castle, Mom," Sophia exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. A tall, thin man dressed in a formal uniform awaited them at the top of the staircase. "Welcome to Montgomery Mansion. I am Albert, the butler. Please, follow me." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Antique furniture, works of art, and Persian rugs adorned the rooms, but Emily noticed subtle signs of decline, a water stain disguised by a painting, the almost imperceptible wear on the velvet curtains, the soft creak of the noble wooden floor. Albert led them through a side corridor to a wing that seemed to have been recently renovated. "These will be your quarters. 3 bedrooms, a private living room, and a bathroom. You will have access to a dedicated phone line and a tablet for internal communication." Emily could hardly believe the size of the space assigned to them. It was larger than her entire old apartment. Sophia was already running from room to room, marveling at everything. "Mr. Montgomery is on the 3rd floor. Soon, Daniel Montgomery. His son will come in person to give you all the instructions. For now, I suggest you settle in and rest. Dinner will be served at 7 p.m. in the family dining room." As soon as Albert left, Sophia jumped into her mother's arms. "Mum, it's just like my drawing, even better." Emily hugged her daughter tightly, wanting to share in her excitement, but something bothered her. The silence of the mansion was thick, almost palpable, as if the walls themselves held secrets that shouldn't be disturbed. While helping Sophia put away her clothes in the enormous wardrobe, which made the small amount of clothing seem even more insignificant, Emily tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort. It was just the natural nervousness of such a drastic change, she told herself. But when she looked out the bedroom window and saw a figure watching them from the 3rd floor window, a shiver ran down her spine. The figure disappeared quickly, like a shadow fleeing from the light, leaving Emily with an unsettling certainty. There was much more to that mansion than met the eye, and she was about to discover what it was. Dinner was served promptly at 7, as Albert had informed them. Emily and Sophia were led to a smaller, cozier dining room than the grand hall they had glimpsed during their tour of the mansion. A woman of about 40 years old was already seated at the table when they entered. "Ah, you must be Emily, and this little princess can only be Sophia." The woman smiled, her brown eyes conveying a genuine warmth that contrasted with the formality of the setting. "I'm Marianne, Edward's cousin. I've been living here for a few months, ever since Edward needed special care." Emily noticed a shadow pass over Marianne's face as she mentioned her cousin, but before she could ask any questions, the door opened again. A tall man with an aristocratic bearing and a stern expression entered the room. His impeccable suit and rigid posture exuded authority. "Daniel Montgomery," he introduced himself curtly, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I see you've already met Marianne. I hope your accommodations are suitable." "Yes, Mr. Montgomery, they are more than suitable. I appreciate your generosity." Daniel made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Tomorrow morning we will begin your training. The care for my father requires absolute precision. Any mistake could have serious consequences." The dinner proceeded in tense silence, broken only by Sophia's occasional enthusiastic comments about the mansion and Marianne's gentle responses. Emily observed the dynamic between the cousins. Marianne always seemed to seek approval in Daniel's gaze before speaking, as if afraid of making a misstep. After the meal, while Sophia was entertained by Albert with a tour of the inner garden, Daniel led Emily to his office on the second floor. The room was an impressive mix of luxury and austerity, with mahogany bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling and a massive desk dominating the space. "Your duties are simple but crucial," Daniel began, handing Emily a thick folder. "Here is the complete care protocol: medication schedules, hygiene procedures, passive exercises. Everything must be recorded in detail in the system." Emily flipped through the first few pages, noting the complexity of the procedures. "May I ask what caused your father's condition?" Daniel visibly stiffened. "An accident at his country house. The exact circumstances are not relevant to your duties. The important thing is to follow the protocol to the letter." He stood up, walking over to one of the windows that overlooked the back of the property. "There are security cameras in all the main areas of the house, including my father's room. It's a necessary measure, considering his vulnerable state. I hope that won't be a problem." "No, sir, of course not," Emily replied automatically, though the idea of being constantly watched made her uncomfortable. "Good. Now some basic rules. The third floor is restricted, except for my father's room and the adjacent nursing station. The basement is absolutely off-limits. That's where the security and maintenance systems are, and most importantly, do not discuss my father's health condition with anyone outside this house. The press has already created enough sensationalism." Emily nodded, absorbing every word. Daniel continued, "The medical team visits 3 times a week. On the other days, you will be responsible for following their instructions. Dr. Richard, our private physician, has documented everything in detail." When Emily returned to her quarters, she found Sophia already asleep, exhausted after the adventure of exploring part of the garden with Albert. She took advantage of the silence to study the protocol more thoroughly. Something about the medical procedures intrigued her. Her experience was limited to the basic care she had to learn when her grandmother became bedridden years ago, but some of the medications listed seemed strange, especially a specific set that had to be administered precisely at 10 p.m. without fail. The next morning, Emily finally met Edward Montgomery. The room was spacious and equipped like a mini hospital, with monitors, infusion pumps, and other equipment she would still need to learn how to operate. The man in the bed, though clearly weakened, didn't look as old as Emily had expected. He must have been just over 60. "Vital signs are checked every 2 hours," explained Nurse Regina, a middle-aged woman who would be responsible for her training. "Dr. Richard has entered the entire history into the tablet. You will only have access to the data relevant to daily care." As Regina demonstrated the basic procedures, Emily couldn't take her eyes off Edward's face. There was something in his expression, a subtle tension around the eyes that didn't seem natural for someone in a vegetative state. The following days were filled with intense learning. Emily absorbed every detail, every procedure, always observing. She noticed curious patterns. Every night after the 10 p.m. medication, the monitors recorded a significant drop in Edward's brain activity. By morning, the levels returned to normal. Sophia adapted surprisingly well to her new life. Marianne had helped her enroll in the nearby school, and the girl was delighted with her new friends and teachers. On free afternoons, she spent hours in the garden, talking to the flowers as if they held magical secrets. It was on one of those afternoons, while watching Sophia through the window of Edward's room, that Emily noticed something disturbing. The reflection in the glass clearly showed Edward blinking, a quick but deliberate movement. When she turned around, he was as still as ever. "Mr. Montgomery," she whispered, approaching the bed. "Can you hear me?" No response. But when Emily checked the monitors, she noticed a sudden spike in brain activity. Her heart raced. There was something very wrong with this situation. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Emily decided to investigate further. She waited for everyone to retire and silently returned to Edward's room. The cameras were a problem, but she had noticed that between 11 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. there was a brief interruption in the system for backup, a detail casually mentioned by Albert. Taking advantage of those 15 minutes, Emily thoroughly examined the room. Behind one of the monitors, she found something that chilled her blood, a small empty vial with a partially removed label. The little she could read suggested a potent sedative, very different from what was listed in the official protocol. Noise in the hallway made her quickly stash the vial back where she had found it. Seconds later, Daniel opened the door. "Emily, what are you doing here at this hour?" "Sorry, Mr. Montgomery. I thought I heard one of the alarms go off, so I came to check. But it must have been my imagination." Daniel studied her for a long moment, his piercing gaze as if trying to read her thoughts. "Very dedicated, aren't you? But it's not necessary. The night nurse does her rounds in 15 minutes. "Of course, I apologize. Good night, Mr. Montgomery." Emily returned to her room but couldn't sleep. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a disturbing picture. Edward Montgomery wasn't in a vegetative state, or at least not entirely. Someone was deliberately keeping him sedated. But why? The answer, she suspected, was somewhere in that mansion. And the more she uncovered, the more dangerous her position would become. Emily glanced at the room next door, where Sophie slept peacefully, and felt a tightness in her chest. She had to be very careful. It wasn't just her life at stake now. Emily spent the next week observing every detail of the mansion's routine with sharper eyes. The staff moved like shadows through the halls, always avoiding prolonged eye contact. Only Marianne maintained an air of normalcy, especially during her interactions with Sophie. One morning, while organizing Edward's medications, Emily noticed Marianne standing at the bedroom door, her tense face reflecting concern. "He was different before, you know," Marianne commented softly, stepping closer to the bed. "Edward was always the pillar of the family. Generous, fair, sometimes too much for his own good." "How so?" Marianne hesitated, glancing nervously at the cameras. "Come have tea with me in the garden later. Sophie loves the roses, doesn't she? We can talk while she plays." The backyard garden was the only place on the property without cameras, a detail Emily had noted during her observations. Apparently, the external security system relied solely on motion sensors along the fences. That afternoon, as Sophie picked flowers under the watchful eye of Albert, who seemed to have developed a special fondness for the girl, Marianne began to reveal more about the Montgomery family. Edward discovered something weeks before the accident, something that deeply disturbed him. Marianne nervously stirred her cup. He spent days locked in his office, making calls, reviewing documents. Daniel was furious about some decisions he made during that time. What kind of decisions? Edward started transferring large sums to different accounts. He talked about restructuring the company, changing the board. Daniel is the CEO, but Edward still held the majority control. Then suddenly, the accident at the country house happened. Emily felt a chill. "And you think that—" "I don't know what to think," Marianne quickly interrupted. "I just know that nothing was the same after. Daniel took over everything. The company, the house, the medical decisions. Even Dr. Richard, who had cared for the family for decades, was replaced." At that moment, Sophia ran up to them, her little hands full of colorful flowers. "Mommy, look what I found. There's a secret garden behind those trees." Emily exchanged a worried glance with Marianne. "Sophia, sweetheart, you shouldn't wander off too far. But Albert showed me. There's a hidden path that leads to an old little house. He said it was where they used to keep the tools." "Marianne, paled. The gardener's house, I didn't know it was still standing. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Emily couldn't get the mention of the abandoned house out of her mind. Every new detail she uncovered about the property seemed connected to a larger mystery. During her nightly rounds in Edward's room, she noticed something different. His eyes, usually fixed and empty, were following her movements. It was subtle, almost imperceptible but undeniable. "Mr. Montgomery," she whispered, making sure she was out of the camera's angle, "if you can understand me, blink twice." The silence stretched for several seconds. Then slowly, Edward blinked. Once. Twice. Emily's heart raced. Her suspicions were correct. Edward was conscious, trapped in his own body. She needed to figure out what was going on, but how could she do it without putting Sophia at risk? The key. Next morning, while helping Sophia get ready for school, Emily noticed her daughter had dropped something under the bed, a piece of paper folded several times. "What's this, sweetheart?" "Albert gave it to me. He said it's a treasure map, but it's our secret." Sophia smiled proudly. "He said there are lots of cool secrets in the mansion, like hidden passages and fake doors, just like in the movies." Emily examined the paper with growing interest. It wasn't just a child's drawing. It looked like a detailed schematic of underground tunnels connecting different points of the property. One of them led directly from the old gardener's house to Edward's office. "Sophia, when did Albert give this to you?" "Yesterday, after we came back from the secret garden. He said Mr. Edward used to play in those passages when he was little. Cool, right?" Emily carefully tucked the map away. Albert, the discreet butler who seemed to know more than he let on, was trying to tell her something. But why through Sophia? Was it a way to protect her, using a child's innocence to pass along information without raising suspicions? During lunch, Emily observed Albert more closely. The butler maintained his usual impeccable posture, but there was something different in his demeanor, especially when Daniel was around. "Albert," she called to him when she found him alone in the hallway, "my daughter showed me an interesting drawing you gave her." The butler showed no surprise. "Ah, yes. Children love stories about hidden treasures. The mansion has so many interesting tales." "Including some recent ones?" Albert adjusted his tie, a gesture Emily had already noticed as a sign of nervousness. "Some stories, Mrs. Emily, are better understood when lived, not told. Mr. Edward always said the truth finds its own way to the light." Before Emily could press for more information, the sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Daniel appeared, his gaze shifting suspiciously between the two. "Any problems?" "No, sir," Albert replied promptly. "Mrs. Emily was just asking about the dinner menu. Sophia is a bit picky with food." Daniel nodded, but his gaze lingered on Emily for too long. "Speaking of Sophia, I've received excellent reports from her school. I'm glad to see she's adjusting so well." The tone was casual, but Emily felt the veiled threat. Daniel was making it clear he knew every move her daughter made. That night, after making sure Sophia was sound asleep, Emily decided it was time to investigate the old gardener's house. If the map was correct, she might find answers that explained Edward's condition, and perhaps a way to help him. What she didn't know was that her decision would set off a chain of events that would forever change the fate of the Montgomery family, and that the price of the truth might be higher than she was prepared to pay. The night was especially quiet, as Emily decided to explore the gardener's house. The map provided by Albert indicated a discreet entrance behind a lattice panel covered in ivy. With Sophia safely asleep in her room, Emily took advantage of the gap between the night patrols to venture into the garden. The old structure was smaller than it seemed from a distance, its stone walls covered in moss and vines. Emily found the panel exactly where the map had indicated. After a few minutes of careful inspection, she discovered the mechanism that moved it, a lever disguised as a plant holder. The interior was surprisingly well preserved, as if someone maintained it regularly without altering its outwardly abandoned appearance. Emily turned on the small flashlight she had brought, revealing dusty shelves and furniture covered with sheets. In one corner, she found an old desk. The top drawer was locked, but the key, curiously, was hidden in a nearby vase, as if someone wanted it to be found. Inside the drawer was a journal, its leather cover marked with the initials EM. Emily began to read, her hands trembling slightly. March 15th. My suspicions were confirmed. The documents Rachel sent me leave no room for doubt. Years of embezzlement, ghost contracts, an entire network of corruption within the company itself. And Daniel, my own son, at the center of it all. How did I not see it before? March 20th. I confronted Daniel today. His reaction, I didn't recognize the man in front of me. Veiled threats, empty justifications. This is how business works, Father. No, it's not. Not my business. March 25th. I've started the transfers. The plan is in motion. Rachel has kept copies of everything in a safe place. Tomorrow I'll go to the country house to finalize the last details. Daniel can't stop what's coming. The journal ended abruptly there. Emily felt a chill as she realized the date coincided with the accident Marianne had mentioned. But who was Rachel? And where were those copies of the documents? A noise startled her. Someone was approaching the house. Emily quickly hid the journal and concealed herself behind a cabinet. Through the crack in the window, she saw Marianne, sneaking in carrying a folder. "Emily," Marianne called softly. "I know you're here, Albert told me." Emily emerged from her hiding spot, still cautious. "How did you know I'd come?" "Because I've come here too many times. This is where Edward used to meet Rachel." Marianne opened the folder she was carrying. "She was our accountant. She discovered irregularities, started investigating. Edward trusted her." "What happened to her?" "Officially, she resigned and moved abroad. In reality," Marianne hesitated, "no one has seen her since the day of Edward's accident." Emily examined the documents Marianne had brought, financial spreadsheets, contracts, printed emails. Everything pointed to a complex scheme of embezzlement from the Montgomery company. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because Edward is getting worse. The medications Daniel insists on keeping, they're not for treatment. They're for control. I should have done something sooner, but..." Marianne wiped away a tear. "I'm scared, Emily. Daniel has so much power, so many connections." A noise from the garden made them freeze. A car's headlights briefly illuminated the windows. "Quickly!" Marianne whispered, pointing to a door at the back. "Use the passage. It leads near the kitchen. I'll distract whoever it is." Emily followed through the narrow tunnel, guided only by the faint light of the lantern. The path was more complex than the one indicated on the map, with several forks. At one point, she passed a small room that looked like an improvised archive, with boxes stacked against the walls. When she finally emerged through a hidden door in the kitchen pantry, her heart nearly stopped. Edward was there, pouring himself a glass of water. "Emily, what are you doing here at this hour?" "Sophia was thirsty," she replied quickly. "I came to get water for her." Edward watched her for a long moment. "Interesting, considering I saw Sophia drinking water with Albert less than 10 minutes ago." Emily felt her blood run cold. Edward stepped closer, his face a mask of feigned concern. "You know, Emily, you've been doing exceptional work with my father. Sophia is also a lovely girl. It would be a shame if something disrupted this arrangement. That's so convenient for everyone." "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Montgomery." "No? Then why is there garden soil on your shoes?" He smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A word of advice, focus on your work. Some doors are better left closed, for your sake and Sophia's." Emily nodded mechanically, grabbed a glass of water, and left the kitchen with measured steps. Only when she reached her room did she allow herself to tremble. In the bed beside her, Sophia slept peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding them. But Emily could no longer pretend to be ignorant. The documents she had seen, Edward's diary, Rachel's disappearance, it all connected. And now she had an impossible decision to make: continue investigating and risk everything, or step back and abandon Edward to his chemical prison. That night she barely slept. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every noise a warning. In her mind, the words from Edward's diary blended with Daniel's veiled threats. Somewhere in that mansion, there was enough evidence to expose the truth. But the price of that truth might be too high. The next morning, Emily noticed subtle changes in the mansion's routine. The frequency of security patrols had increased, and 2 new guards were stationed in the garden. Daniel was tightening his grip. During her morning care for Edward, she noticed he was more responsive than usual. His eyes followed her with an urgency she had never seen before. When she leaned in to adjust his pillow, he managed to move the fingers of his right hand slightly. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Emily whispered, making sure she was out of the camera's range. Edward blinked twice, his code for yes. Then, with visible effort, his fingers began to make repetitive movements. Emily furrowed her brow, focused. "Letters. Are you trying to spell something?" 2 more blinks. Slowly, letter by letter, Edward formed a word. Libray. At that moment, the door opened, and Nurse Regina entered for the shift change. Emily casually stepped away from the bed, her heart racing. The library, another piece of the puzzle. During lunch, Sophia excitedly chatted about her new school friend, Sophie. "Her mum used to work here, you know," Sophia said between bites. Sophie said she knew Mr. Edward. Emily tried to keep her voice casual. "Really? And what else did she say?" "She said her mom had a funny name, Rachel, like the princess in the movie." Emily nearly dropped her glass. Rachel, the accountant mentioned in Edward's diary, the same one who had mysteriously disappeared. "Sophie, sweetie, do you know where Marianne lives?" "Yes, it's near the school. She invited me to play there after class tomorrow." Emily carefully considered her options. A meeting with Rachel's daughter could provide crucial information, but it would also be risky. Daniel was surely monitoring her movements. She decided to talk to Albert first. The butler seemed to be the only one who knew all the secrets of the Montgomery mansion, and more importantly, showed loyalty to Edward. She found him in the library, methodically organizing books on the towering shelves. "Albert, I need your help," Emily said directly. "Edward gave me a message today about this place." The butler didn't seem surprised. The library was Mr. Edward's favorite refuge, especially the Russian literature section. Emily glanced at the shelves. Why Russian literature? Mr. Edward always said the Russians understood well how to hide secrets in plain sight. Albert adjusted a specific book on the shelf. Crime and Punishment, for example. A story about truths that can't stay buried forever. Emily stepped closer to the indicated shelf. The volume of Crime and Punishment seemed slightly out of place compared to the others. When she pulled it, she heard a soft click. "The cameras in this room have an interesting blind spot," Albert remarked casually, moving to block the view of the corner where Emily was standing. "Right at this angle. The technician has already been called to fix the issue, but these things take time, don't they?" The side of the bookshelf had shifted a few centimeters, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside, Emily found a thin folder and a flash drive. "Mr. Edward was a cautious man," Albert continued, still blocking the camera's view. "He always kept backups of everything, in different places, of course. You never know when a digital file might get corrupted." Emily tucked the items into her bag, her heart racing. "Why are you helping me, Albert?" "I've served the Montgomery family for 30 years. I watched young Daniel grow up. I've also seen how power and greed can corrupt a soul." He paused meaningfully. "Mr. Edward trusted Rachel. She had evidence, documents that could expose everything. On the night of the accident, she came here. She was scared, said she needed to deliver something to Mr. Edward personally. What happened? She never made it to the country house. Her car was found abandoned on the road. The police ruled it as a runaway case, but..." Albert left the sentence hanging. "Sophie, her daughter, still asks about her mother." Emily felt a weight in her stomach. Sophia mentioned that Sophie invited her to play. Sometimes fate presents us with opportunities disguised as coincidences. Albert adjusted his tie. Sophie's mother, before leaving, left something with her daughter, a special gift that was only to be opened in case of an emergency. At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, Albert returned to his tasks while Emily pretended to examine a book. Marianne entered the library, her face tense. "Emily, Daniel wants to see you in the office now." The walk to the office felt endless. Emily could feel the weight of the documents in her bag, as if they were screaming to be discovered. When she entered the room, Daniel was not alone. A man she didn't know was sitting in one of the armchairs. "Emily, this is Dr. Mendelsohn, the new coordinator of the medical team," Daniel introduced. "He has some concerns about my father's care." The doctor observed her with a clinical gaze. "We've noticed some inconsistencies in the nightly reports, changes in vital signs at specific times. And coincidentally," Daniel continued, "these changes seem to occur during your shifts." Emily maintained her composure, even as she felt cold sweat on the back of her neck. "I follow the protocol rigorously, Mr. Montgomery. Every procedure is documented." "Yes, yes," Daniel smiled, that cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Still, Dr. Mendelsohn suggests a change in the schedule. Starting today, you will only be responsible for the day shift. And Sophia," he paused deliberately, "I heard she made a new friend at school. Sophie, isn't it? What an interesting coincidence." The threat was crystal clear. Emily felt her heart tighten, but she kept her face neutral. "I can assure you that my only interest is the well-being of your father, Mr. Montgomery." "Of course it is." Daniel stood up. "You may leave now. Oh, and Emily, enjoy your outing with Sophia tomorrow." Little Sophie's house is in a charming neighborhood, isn't it? Emily left the office feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Daniel knew her every move, always 2 steps ahead, but she also had her own cards up her sleeve now. The question was how to play them without putting Sophia at risk. Emily knew she had to act with extreme caution. The visit to Sophie's house was both an opportunity and a trap. Daniel was watching her, waiting for a mistake, but she couldn't ignore the possibility of finding crucial answers. The next day, as she walked with Sophia to her new friend's house, Emily kept all her senses on high alert. The neighborhood was quiet, with simple but well-kept houses. Sophie and her grandmother, Teresa, lived in a small yellow house with a flower-filled garden. "Welcome," Teresa greeted them with a gentle smile, though her eyes carried a deep sadness. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about her new friend. As the girls ran off to Sophie's room, Teresa served Emily coffee on the small back porch. The spot offered a clear view of the street, allowing Emily to monitor any suspicious activity. "Sophie told me you work at the Montgomery mansion," Teresa commented, her voice cautious. "Yes, I take care of Mr. Edward." Teresa gripped her cup tightly. "My daughter Rachel, she also worked there until—" Her voice faltered. "Mrs. Teresa," Emily chose her words carefully, "I've come across some information about Rachel's work." "She was investigating something important, wasn't she?" The elderly woman glanced nervously around before standing up. "Wait here." Minutes later, she returned with an old shoebox. "Rachel left this with Sophie before she left. She said it was a special treasure, only to be opened if something happened to her." Inside the box, Emily found a notebook, some photos, and a second flash drive. The notebook contained detailed notes about suspicious financial transactions, all linked to shell companies connected to Daniel Montgomery. "Rachel uncovered a huge scheme," Teresa explained, her voice trembling. "Daniel was siphoning off millions through overpriced contracts. When Edward found out, he threatened to expose everything. And that's when the accident happened. Rachel had concrete evidence. She was supposed to meet Edward that night at the country house, but..." Teresa wiped away a tear. "The police say she ran away, but I know my daughter. She would never abandon Sophie." A noise from the girls' room interrupted the conversation. Emily found Sophia and Sophie playing with an old trunk of costumes. "Look, Mum." Sophia held up a string of fake pearls. Sophie said it belonged to her mum. Sophie, a girl with expressive eyes like her mother's in the photos, smiled shyly. "There's more cool stuff in the attic. Want to see?" In the small attic, among dusty boxes, Sophie showed her secret spot, a space under the eaves where she kept her childhood treasures. It was there, hidden among old dolls and colorful books, that Emily saw something that made her heart stop. A thick envelope bearing the Montgomery Enterprises seal. "Sophie, sweetie, where did you find this?" "Mom put it there. She said it was Like a treasure hunt, that someday someone special would need to find it. Emily discreetly examined the envelope. It contained copies of contracts, bank statements, and a letter addressed to Edward Montgomery. The handwriting was Rachel's. "Edward, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't deliver the evidence in person. The scheme is bigger than we imagined. Daniel isn't acting alone. There are powerful people involved, even within the police. Keep Sophie safe." She holds the final key, an encrypted file that can only be opened with a password only she knows. A childhood memory we shared. Something Daniel could never guess. With hope, Rachel. The sound of a car parking on the street made Emily quickly stash the documents in her bag. Through the attic window, she saw a familiar black vehicle, the same one often parked at the Montgomery mansion. "Sophia, sweetheart. We need to go." Teresa noticed her urgency. "Use the back door. The alley leads to the main square." As they hurriedly said their goodbyes, Sophie hugged Sophia tightly. "Will you come back to play more?" "Sophie." Emily knelt to the girls. "Level. What's your most special memory with your mum? Something only the two of you knew?" The girls' eyes lit up. "The Sunflower Song. Mom used to sing it every night before bed. She said sunflowers always find the light, even on the darkest days." Emily felt a shiver of understanding. On the flash drive found in the library, there was a file named sunflower.exe. The sound of footsteps on the front porch hastened their departure. Teresa guided them through the back alley as male voices approached the main entrance. Back at the mansion, Emily knew her window of time was closing. Daniel suspected something. The change in his schedule, the car following her, everything indicated he was preparing to act. In her room, after Sophia fell asleep, Emily connected the two flash drives to the laptop she had brought from home. On the first, she found a series of incriminating spreadsheets and documents. On the second, password protected, a single file waited to reveal its secrets. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Sunflower." The screen flickered, revealing a video. In it, Rachel explained the entire scheme in detail, with dates, names, and amounts. More importantly, it showed a secretly recorded meeting where Daniel openly discussed his plans to take control of the company, including what he would do to Edward if he tried to interfere. Emily looked at her sleeping daughter, and then at the computer screen. She now had all the evidence she needed to expose the truth, but she also knew that once she started acting, there would be no turning back. The only question was where to begin. Emily woke up startled by urgent knocks on her door. It was Albert, his usually impassive face marked by concern. "Miss Emily, you need to see this immediately." On the living room television, a live report showed the facade of the Montgomery mansion. The headline was alarming: "Businessman Edward Montgomery to be transferred to a specialized clinic abroad. Daniel plans to move him early tomorrow," Albert explained, his voice low. "Once he's out of the country, he'll never come back." Emily finished, her heart racing. "We need to act now." With Sophia still asleep, Emily began to put her plan into action. First, using the laptop, she compiled all the documents from the flash drives into a single file, including Rachel's video. Then, she sent copies to different email addresses she had created earlier. "Albert, I need your help. How much time can you give me without them noticing my absence?" "The cameras in the main hallway will be under maintenance for 30 minutes. That's the most I can do without raising suspicions." Emily nodded, determined. That's enough time. In Edward's room, she found Marianne already carrying out the morning procedures. The two exchanged a meaningful glance. "Daniel left to finalize the transfer details," Marianne informed her. "But he gave strict orders to double the sedative dosage." "We're not doing that," Emily declared, approaching Edward's bed. "Mr. Montgomery, I know you can understand me. We've found the evidence. All of them. Rachel managed to protect the documents." Edward's eyes widened slightly upon hearing Rachel's name. With visible effort, he moved his fingers. "ProtectsOphia. Sophia is safe," Emily assured. "Her grandmother kept her protected all these years. But now we need to protect you. Daniel plans to take you out of the country tomorrow." At that moment, Dr. Mendelsohn entered the room. His face showed surprise upon seeing the three people there. "What's going on here? The new medication should have been administered 10 minutes ago." "We're not administering any more fraudulent medication," Emily declared, her voice firm. "It's over, Doctor. We have all the evidence of Daniel's crimes." The doctor paled but quickly composed himself. "I don't know what you're talking about. Guards." Before he could reach the intercom, Marianne blocked his path. "Enough with the lies. I've been part of this charade for far too long." "You don't understand," Dr. Mendelsohn whispered, his arrogance giving way to fear. "Daniel has powerful connections. No one is safe." "That's why we took precautions," Emily countered, showing her phone. "The evidence has already been sent to multiple places. If anything happens to us, everything will come to light automatically." The doctor seemed to consider his options. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you want me to do?" "First, suspend all medications that keep Mr. Edward sedated. Then you will help us document the entire charade of the past few months." In the following hours, Dr. Mendelsohn, under the close supervision of Emily and Marianne, began reversing the cocktail of medications that had kept Edward in an artificially vegetative state. Albert stood guard discreetly, alerting them to any suspicious movements. Edward began showing signs of increased awareness as the drugs left his system. His movements, though still limited, became more coordinated. "We need to keep him stable until the police arrive," Dr. Mendelsohn explained, now fully cooperating. "Full recovery will take time, but—" The sound of doors slamming on the lower floor interrupted him. Daniel had returned. "Emily," Marianne urged, "use the passage behind the panel. Take the evidence to the police station. I'll try to delay him." "I can't leave you." "Your daughter needs you," Marianne insisted, "and we need someone outside the mansion to ensure the truth comes." "Out?" Emily hesitated for only a second before grabbing her bag with the documents. Through the secret panel, she entered the passage that led to the back of the property. She could hear raised voices above, the sound of hurried footsteps. Her heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might explode. She needed to get to Sophia, pick her up from school, and then— A shadow at the end of the tunnel made her stop. Daniel Montgomery emerged from the shadows, his face twisted into a mask of controlled fury. "Did you really think I didn't know the passages in my own house?" His voice was icy. "That I wasn't monitoring your every move from the start?" Emily took a step back, clutching the bag to her chest. "It's over, Daniel. The evidence has already been sent. Evidence can disappear. People too." He advanced slowly. "Do you know what happened to Rachel when she tried to stand up to me? The same could happen to you. Or to Sophia." The mention of her daughter ignited something in Emily. All her fear turned into fierce determination. "The difference is that Rachel was alone. I am not." At that exact moment, lights flooded the tunnel. Albert and two police officers emerged from a side passage, weapons in hand. "Daniel Montgomery," one of the officers declared, "you are under arrest for attempted fraud, falsification of documents, and attempted aggravated kidnapping." Daniel's face turned into a mask of disbelief as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. His empire of lies was crumbling before his eyes. Emily stepped out of the tunnel to find more police officers at the mansion, Marianne giving her statement, and Edward being attended to by a new medical team. Sophia, brought from school by Teresa, ran into her arms. "Mom, Sophie came too. Can we play in the garden?" Emily hugged her daughter tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. The nightmare was over, but her fight had brought not only justice but also an unexpected family, united by the courage to face the truth. In the weeks following Daniel's arrest, the Montgomery mansion underwent a gradual transformation. The heavy curtains were opened, allowing natural light to flood the once dark rooms. The oppressive silence gave way to the sound of voices and laughter, especially from Sophia and Sophie, who now spent their afternoons playing in the revitalized garden. Edward, freed from the cocktail of medications that had kept him sedated, was making remarkable progress in his recovery. Emily continued as his caregiver, but now under completely different circumstances. The surveillance cameras were removed, except for the external security ones, and the suffocating atmosphere of fear and suspicion had dissipated. "I can never thank you enough," Edward said to Emily during one of his physical therapy sessions. His voice, though still weak, carried the strength of his personality. "You risked everything to uncover the truth." "You would have done the same," Emily replied, helping him with the exercises. "Rachel also risked everything." The mention of Rachel still carried an emotional weight for everyone. The investigation into her disappearance was reopened, now with substantial evidence linking the event to the uncovered scheme. Teresa and Sophie became frequent presences at the mansion. Edward insisted that they move into one of the property's houses, ensuring that Sophie had access to the same quality education as Sophia. "Rachel always said that sunflowers find the light," Teresa commented one afternoon, watching the girls play in the newly planted sunflower garden. She would be proud to see Sophie so happy. Marianne, free from the shadow of Daniel's intimidation, flourished in her new role as interim director of Montgomery Enterprises. Her prior experience and knowledge of the family's legitimate businesses made her the natural choice to assist in the restructuring. "We are undoing years of fraudulent contracts," she explained during a meeting with Edward. "But the solid foundations you built are still there. We can rebuild." Albert maintained his position as butler, but was now treated more like a family member than an employee. His loyalty and crucial role in exposing the truth were not forgotten. "The mansion has a different spirit now," he remarked to Emily while serving tea in the garden, "as if it can finally breathe." Sophia adapted surprisingly well to the changes. Her friendship with Sophie brought a special dimension to her life, and the mansion, once a place of mysteries and shadows, truly became her home. "Mommy?" she asked one night as Emily tucked her into bed. "Are we going to stay here forever?" Emily smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "What do you think?" "I think so. Sophie said we're family now, and families stay together, right?" The simplicity of the child's logic brought tears to Emily's eyes. Indeed, they had become a family, not by blood but by choice and loyalty. Edward made sure to formalize the situation. In a meeting with his lawyers, he established an educational fund for Sophia and Sophie, ensuring that the girls would have every opportunity they deserved. "It's the least I can do," he insisted, when Emily tried to protest. "You not only saved my life, but also the legacy I built. Sophia and Sophie represent the future I always wanted for this family." The news of Daniel's arrest and the discovery of the fraud scheme had a significant impact on the business world. Newspapers and specialized magazines published extensive reports on the case, but Edward made sure to protect the privacy of everyone involved, especially the children. "The truth has already been revealed," he declared in his only interview on the matter. "Now is the time to rebuild, not to relive the past." The Montgomery mansion, once a symbol of power and oppression, gradually transformed into a true home. The gardens, revitalized with the help of Sophia and Sophie, became a sanctuary of peace and joy. The secret passages, once used to hide dark secrets, turned into the setting for innocent treasure hunts. Emily, observing all this transformation, felt deep gratitude. Her quest for survival had turned into something much greater, a journey of justice, redemption, and renewal. One afternoon, as the entire family, because that's what they had become, gathered for a picnic in the garden, Emily realized that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges. What had started as a desperate job to support her daughter had turned into a new life, complete with an extended family and a greater purpose. "You know," Edward remarked, watching Sophia and Sophie running among the sunflowers, "Rachel always said that the truth is like these flowers. It always finds a way to the light." Emily nodded, her heart overflowing with emotion. The Montgomery mansion had transformed from a place of secrets and shadows into a beacon of hope and new beginnings, and this, she knew, was only the beginning of their story. Autumn arrived at the Montgomery mansion, bringing a gentle breeze of change. The investigations into Daniel's financial crimes had expanded, revealing a complex web of complicity that extended far beyond the property's walls. Edward, now almost fully recovered, dedicated himself to restoring not only the company's reputation, but more importantly, the values he had always stood for. "Emily," he called her into his office, now a warm and bright space. "I need your help with a special project." On the table, blueprints and documents outlined the plan for a community center. "I want to turn the country house, where everything happened, into a place of hope, a support center for families in vulnerable situations." Emily examined the documents with interest. The project was ambitious. In addition to temporary housing, it would offer vocational training and psychological support. "It's a beautiful way to turn a painful memory into something positive." "You taught me that," Edward smiled. "When you arrived here, you were in a desperate situation. Now, look at what we've built together." Indeed, the transformation was remarkable. The mansion, once a labyrinth of secrets, had become a vibrant home. The laughter of Sophia and Sophie echoed through the halls, mingling with the sound of the piano that Marianne had started playing again after years. Teresa, who had initially been reluctant to accept Edward's help, was now coordinating the community center project. "Rachel always said that exposing injustices wasn't enough. We had to build something better in their place," she commented. During a meeting, the mention of Rachel no longer brought only pain. Her courage and sacrifice had planted the seeds of a profound transformation. The investigation into her disappearance continued, now with the support of resources and investigators committed to the truth. Sophia and Sophie had developed a special bond, as if something beyond friendship united them. "Mom," Sophia said one night, "Sophie told me she sometimes dreams of her mother singing the Sunflower Song. I dream of it too, even though I never met her. Is that strange?" Emily hugged her daughter, moved. "No, sweetheart. Some people leave, such deep marks that even those who never knew them can feel their presence." Edward's recovery brought more than justice. It brought redemption. Under his renewed leadership, the Montgomery Company launched social responsibility programs, prioritizing transparency and ethics. Marianne, as the executive director, implemented changes that would ensure the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Albert, always discreet, continued to be the silent guardian of the mansion, but now with a different gleam in his eyes. "You know, Mrs. Emily," he commented while overseeing the installation of a greenhouse in the garden, a special project of Sophia and Sophie, "there are different kinds of families. Some are formed by blood, others by choice. The best ones are formed by love." The greenhouse became the girls' new favorite project. They cultivated not only flowers, but also medicinal herbs and vegetables. "We'll donate it to the community center when it's ready," Sophie explained proudly. "Mom always said that helping others makes our garden grow." One afternoon, as Emily was organizing the final details of the community center with Edward, he made a surprising announcement. "I want you to take over as the director of the center. No one understands the importance of reaching out to those in need better than you." "But what about my work here?" Edward smiled. "Emily, you were never just a caregiver. You were the one who brought light back to this house, who taught us that family goes far beyond blood ties." That evening, during dinner as everyone gathered around the large dining table, Emily looked around and felt her heart overflow. Sophia and Sophie whispered and laughed, planning their next adventures in the garden. Teresa and Marianne discussed details of the community center, while Albert served the meal with his usual care. Edward, at the head of the table, watched everything with eyes shining with satisfaction. "A toast," Edward proposed, raising his glass, "to the family we chose and the family that chose us." The glasses clinked, and Emily realized her life had changed in ways she never imagined possible. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into a journey of discovery, healing, and love. From the garden, visible through the large windows of the dining room, the sunflowers swayed gently in the evening breeze, their faces always turned toward the light, a constant reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a path to hope. A year had passed since the revelations that transformed the Montgomery mansion. The community center, now fully operational, had become a beacon of hope for dozens of families. Emily coordinated the project with the same dedication she had once devoted to caring for Edward. The center's inauguration coincided with a significant discovery. Through ongoing investigations, documents were found that finally clarified Rachel's fate. She had not run away, as Daniel had tried to make everyone believe. Her notes, hidden in a secret safe in the country house, revealed the full extent of the scheme she had uncovered. It was deeper than we imagined, Edward explained during a family meeting. Rachel discovered connections with influential politicians and businessmen. Daniel was just one piece of the puzzle. Sophie, now 8 years old, hugged her mother's diary, which Edward had recovered. She knew the truth would come out one day, didn't she? "Yes, sweetheart," Teresa replied, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "That's why she left so many clues, like a treasure map for the right people to find." The mansion's garden, now a lush sea of sunflowers, had become a symbol of transformation. Sophia and Sophie had created a small memorial among the flowers, not a place of sadness, but a celebration of truth and justice. "Sunflowers are like people," Sophia explained with her childlike wisdom. "Even when the sky is cloudy, they know where the light is." The Montgomery Company, under the joint management of Edward and Marianne, implemented a scholarship program in Rachel's name to help others find their light, as Edward explained during the official announcement. Albert, ever observant, noticed how the mansion had changed. "The walls no longer hold dark secrets," he remarked to Emily. "Now they only hold happy memories." On a golden autumn afternoon, while the children played in the garden, Emily found Edward in his study, organizing old photographs. "I found something you should see," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside, a photo showed Rachel and a young Sophie in the same garden where Sophia and Sophie now played. "She was right, you know, about everything." "How so?" "Rachel always said that the truth is like a sunflower. It may take time to sprout, but once it finds its way to the light, nothing can stop it from growing." Emily smiled, thinking about how her own life had blossomed in unexpected ways. From a desperate single mother in need of a job, she had become part of a family that chose truth above all else. In the garden, Sophia and Sophie had created a new ritual. Every evening at sunset, they sang the sunflower song that Rachel used to sing. The gentle melody echoed through the halls of the Montgomery mansion, as if cradling not only memories of the past, but also promises of the future. "Mommy!" Sophia called, running toward her with a sunflower in her hands. "Sophie says every flower has a story to tell. What's our story?" Emily hugged her daughter, looking at the family they had built. Edward, recovered and strong, was talking to Teresa about new projects for the community center. Marianne played the piano in the music room, her melodies flowing through the open windows. Albert was setting up afternoon tea with his usual care. "Our story, sweetheart, is about finding light in the most unlikely places, about how different people can become a family, about how the truth, like sunflowers, always finds its way to the sun." Sophie joined them, carrying more flowers. "Mommy said that important stories need to be told always. And this story will always be told," Emily promised, hugging both girls, "to remind us that sometimes we need to go through darkness to find the light, and that we're never truly alone on this journey." The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The sunflowers in the garden, true to their nature, turned toward the last rays of light, like sentinels guarding not only the mansion, but also the truths and bonds that had transformed lives. In the Montgomery mansion, where secrets and lies once resided, something far more precious now flourished. A family united not by blood, but by choice, truth, and love. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Emily, Sophia, and the entire Montgomery family has touched your hearts. To continue exploring equally moving and transformative stories, we've prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking the link on the left. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Share in the comments which city you're watching from and which part of the story touched your heart the most. Every day, we bring new narratives that celebrate courage, truth, and the transformative power of love. Until next time.